Got that? Because that's all it is. Thank you for your opinion and your advice, and you smile sweetly and say, I'm going to seriously consider this. Because God's government is a government of freedom, and freedom is based on free choice. I am the master of my destiny. I am the one that chooses what I do and what I do not do to my body. Don't let anyone take that away from you. The other method of healing is based on faith. And Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. If you can see it, it's not faith. It's like my daughter Emma, when she was 5, she said, Mum, I'm going to grow up in a minute. Now, it took her another 10 years. She had great faith. She was only this big. Took more than a minute. And I think when we are sick, when we have an injury or an ailment, don't we want to be better in a minute? I do. But it takes more than a minute, doesn't it? It takes faith. And if you can see it, it's not faith. And faith and hope are inseparable companions. Hope sees the invisible, feels the intangible, and achieves the impossible. That's what I'm interested in. So let's look at the system that's based on fear. It's based on a theory that we evolved. And because we evolved, we cannot heal. And because we cannot heal, then a whole billion-dollar industry was set up to create drugs that are supposed to heal you. But let me define this very clearly right now. Drugs never cure disease. Got that? Now, in a crisis, a drug may save a life, granted, but they never cure disease. They just mask the symptoms. So if you're told you've got to do this immediately because if you don't, what do you say? Thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to seriously consider this. Psalm 146 verse 3, the Bible says, put not your trust in princes. Who are the princes? Aren't they the authorities in the field? The government, medicine, nutrition, naturopathy, whatever area, the princes are the authorities. And what does the Bible say? Put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. His breath goes forth, he goes back to his earth. In that very day, his thoughts perish. In other words, he's just a human being. And then the next verse says, happy is he that has the God of Jacob as his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God, that made heaven, earth, sea, and all that in them is, that keeps truth forever. That's what I'm interested in, is truth. And this system that's based on fear, on a theory that we evolved, so cannot heal, so we need drugs, it's based on deception. And what's deception? Not as it seems. But this system was based on the fact that we were created in the image of God to heal. We don't doubt when we get a cut that it won't heal. It was a little over a year ago, I totally broke my radius out of alignment. Yes, I went to emergency because it was so painful. And when I looked at it as the weirdest shape, it was down on the beach, on the rock, stood on a slippery rock. The feet went up and slammed down on this. And the lifesaver looked at the wrist and said, you've got to go to hospital. It looked very weird. And I'm so glad for the skill of the orthopedic surgeon that pulled it back into place. And I'm so glad for the pain-killing medication where I didn't feel him pull it back into place. But there was once an orthopedic surgeon said to me one day, we can set a bone, we cannot heal it. Is he right? He is right. It's the body and the body alone that has the power to heal. My aim this week is to create in you a faith that maybe you haven't had very strong, that we live in an incredible body. And this body has the ability to heal when you give it the right conditions. Doesn't mean you don't go to the princes and get their advice, but what do you do with their advice? Thank you so much for your advice. Thank you so much for your opinion. I'm going to seriously consider this. And you go home and you weigh up the pros and cons because it is your right. It is your God-given right. So when a lady says to me, but the doctor said I had to do it, do you? He's one of the princes. It's his opinion. I wanted to lay that foundation. Oh, there's a little space in here. It's for something very exciting. It's called herbs. In Psalm 104, verse 14, the Bible says, God gave herbs for the service of man. I love that verse. The herbs come in and say, where would you like me? What would you like me to do? Whereas drugs are robots. Get out of my way. I've got a job to do, whether you need it or not. And as we go through this week, we'll be mentioning some herbs, and we'll also be mentioning some drugs, and we'll be looking at how the different ones work. As I mentioned, there's no doubt that in a crisis, a drug may be necessary, but they cannot heal you. It's the body and the body alone that has the ability to heal. A herb cannot heal you. It is the body and the body alone. What the herbs do is they work with the healing powers that are already in that body. Medicine calls it synergism. The Bible calls it serve you. That's why the verse says that God gave herbs for the service of man. They work with you. So as we go on our journey down through the gastrointestinal tract, we're going to be looking at different areas, what they do, how they work, how they get out of balance, how you can restore back the balance. Proverbs 14 verse 6, the Bible says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. My aim is to give you an understanding of your gastrointestinal tract. You will then automatically have the knowledge of what to do with it. So we begin in the mouth, and that's the only area that we have say over. We have say over what goes in. Is it organic? Is it the best prepared, or is it just any old devitalized fast food? Who chooses? We do. We do. Remember, it's our God-given right to choose. If someone says to me, but I like junk food, you know what I say? Okay, next. It's your right. It's your right to choose. I might not agree with it, but it's your right. But I think many people are putting things into their body they don't realize what it's doing to them. That's why I believe the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles. Many people are sick through ignorance. So we choose what goes in. We choose how much goes in. Is it 5 platefuls of food, or is it 1 plateful of food? And as we go down our gastrointestinal tract, you will see that the stomach cannot handle huge amounts. It's only so much it can handle. It's like my sons, that are built like this, carrying heavy loads up the hill, and then I come to carry the heavy load up the hill. I'm struggling. I just can't do it. The stomach just can't take huge amounts. It can only take so much. So we have say over what goes in. We have say over how much goes in. We have say over how long it's in the mouth. Is it chew, swallow, chew, swallow, chew, swallow? Or is it put knife and fork down, look out the window and chew, chew, chew? My husband does everything fast. Everything's fast. Drives very fast, and I don't mind. I like fast. We're very excited to be in Germany and going at 250 kilometres an hour on the Autobahn. I don't know whether I want to drive the car, but I don't mind being in it. But he's got another problem. He eats too fast. Because he's just got to get it down. He's got something else on. And so I'll touch his arm and smile. And he'll go, oh. He just needs a little gentle reminder. When we chew properly, we break the food down to tiny particles, which means there's a larger surface area for the enzymes to work on. And there are no teeth in the stomach. Stomach's an incredible thing. It massages it, throws it around, but it's only in the mouth. There are teeth. And the strongest muscle in the whole of the body, might surprise you, it's the masseter muscle. You see what it does when you're eating nuts? Whew. It crushes them. It's a very strong muscle. That's why it's very important for babies to breastfeed, because they have to work hard to get the milk out of that nipple. Whereas bottle fed, it's just, it doesn't work that hard. It's also important to eat crunchy food. Crunchy food strengthens that masseter muscle, strengthens the teeth. So we have say over how long it's in there. And as you will see as we go down our gastrointestinal tract, that affects the whole of the way down. So we have say over what goes in, we have say over how long it's in there, we have over how much goes in, and we also have say over the environment of entry. Is it a stressful environment? No controversial issues should be discussed at the table. I liked one author, she said, cast off care and anxious thought when you sit to dine. So it should be a peaceful environment, because that affects the digestion, as we will see as we travel down. And we also have say over the fifth choice is how often does it go in? Is it going in every half hour? Is it going every 2 hours? Or is it just going in at meal times? And as we get to the stomach, you'll see the importance of that. So we have say over these 5 areas, and that affects the whole of the gastrointestinal tract. So let's begin with the mouth. The mouth is an alkaline environment. And as you'll see as we go down, the alkaline and acid change at different places in the gastrointestinal tract, but the mouth is alkaline. And there are 2 enzymes that are released in the mouth. A lot of people don't realize digestion begins in the mouth, not only with your chewing, but there are certain enzymes that are released. One is released from the sublingual glands that are under the tongue. And this enzyme is called lingual lipase. Lipase is a fat-breaking enzyme, and it breaks down saturated fat. Not the unsaturated fat, only the saturated fat. So saturated fat begins in the mouth. What's saturated fat? Ghee, butter, coconut oil, palm oil. There's some saturated fat maybe in the macadamias. There's a little tiny bit in the avocado. Those fats are unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. And yet what have we been told about saturated fat? Bad. I trust you've got the message that it's a myth, because these fats have stood the test of time. They've been eating for thousands of years, and there was no heart disease until the Industrial Revolution. So we need to see what happened then. Oh, they invented high heat chemical equipment to extract oil out of hard seeds. And what have we been told? Stop eating the saturated fat, eat the polyunsaturated fat. No. In my book, Sustain Me, I have a whole chapter on that. You can pursue that in detail. Now, the saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. The other enzyme that's released in the mouth is a salivary amylase called ptyalin. And ptyalin is a salivary amylase that begins starch digestion. Today, we often call starch carbohydrates, so that's all your grains. So that would be pastas, cereals, pizzas, breads. So all of those carbohydrates, the starch begins in the mouth. So it's very, very important to chew very well so that those salivary amylase enzymes are mixed with that. In a baby, it's in very minute amounts, just enough to help break down that little bit of starch that's in the breast milk. And the first teeth that a baby gets is 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom, 8 teeth. And they come through at about 7, 8 months. They're called milk teeth. You know why? That's all babies should be getting. But what are the princes telling mothers today? Remember the princes? You've got to give your baby rice cereal, is that right? At 6 months of age, because breast milk does not have enough iron in it in the second 6 months of life. Did God make a mistake? There. Look how much a baby grows in the first 6 months compared to the second 6 months. They need more iron in the first 6 months than in the second 6 months. But the princes have come along and said, oh, you must give your baby rice cereal. But do you know the baby cannot digest it? Because until the molars are through, there is very little ptyalin in the mouth. What do your molars do? They grind. What do we grind? Grain. I first heard this when my first baby was only a few months old. A friend of mine, he was about 35, and he was in charge of the malabsorption syndrome ward in the biggest children's hospital in Australia. He said this ward is full of babies with malabsorption syndrome of the gut because they had starched too young. And what are the princes telling mothers? And you know, the mothers listen because you know what the princes say? If you don't give your baby this starch, your baby's brain won't develop, your baby won't develop. What's that, fear? And remember what you say, thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to seriously consider this. And in my book, Sustain Me, there's a whole section on, it's called What Shall I Feed My Baby? And it shows you these basic principles. Photocopy it, take a photo of it and give it to every mother you know. Because many people have gut problems today because they were fed starch too young. 3 things must be present. The baby should sit. That's gravity. The baby should be able to feed themselves. When does that happen? Maybe 6, 7 months. And the baby should have teeth. But remember, those first teeth are milk teeth. I used to give my little ones a piece of celery. And by the end of our meal, the celery was half chewed through. And then another meal, a piece of cucumber. And by the end of the meal, there's little bits of cucumber all over the tray, all over the floor. That's all right, it's taste time. It's taste time. But it was not till my babies had molars, that's 14 to 16, even sometimes 20 months. This is very different to what the princes tell us, isn't it? Did my baby suffer? Well, my son James would not interested in food till he was 16 months old. Did he suffer? He's a master builder. He's an incredible artist. He plays the panpipes and he's an incredible musician. Built like a bodybuilder. He's 45. He didn't suffer. Let's go back a few hundred years ago. Babies were not fed food. Did you know that? They didn't have bay mixers and blenders back then. Do you know what that means? Galileo, Einstein, Rembrandt, Mozart, Bach, all the geniuses from times past did not have food sometimes till they were 2 or 3. Did they suffer? No. Do you know, God has given us common sense, but it's not very common today. Isn't that right? That's why it's time to, and don't go into an argument with the prince when the prince says, or the princess, you should be giving your baby rice cereal. You know what you say? Thank you for your advice. You don't say, no, I'm not going to give them rice cereal. No. Thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to seriously consider this. And as you go out, you might say, don't call me, I'll call you. Because it's your God-given right. And that's why we need information so we can make these decisions. One lady said she had the authorities on her door, and when she opened the door, you know what they said to her? Are you feeding your baby food? Eh? What right do they have? So to get them off her back, she had to say yes. But in her mind, it meant she's breastfeeding her baby. I said to her, say to them, don't compare my baby with a Samoan baby. How big are Samoan babies? How big was her baby? Just a little light thing. So ptyalin is the salivary amylase that begins starch digestion. Coming down, we have an interesting phenomenon in the throat. It's called swallowing, and we don't even think about it. But we have two pipes, two tubes coming down at the back of our throat. One is the trachea to our lungs, and we certainly know it if the food goes down there, don't we? We cough and cough as if we're dying. Wonderful process, wonderful reaction to keep that food out of those lungs. When we swallow, it closes the trachea and it opens the esophagus. And that's a muscular contraction. So it opens. And then the esophagus starts to pump the food down. And as it pumps the food, it opens a little valve at the top of the stomach called the cardiac sphincter. Here's the cardiac sphincter here, and it's a double layered valve. I'll tell you a funny story. Jacqueline and I are in Little Rock, 5 a.m. in the morning, come into an area in the airport, no one's there. And we see a policeman, big guy with a very large gun. And we said, "We think we're in the wrong place." He smiled, he said, "Follow me, I'll take you." And as we're standing at the lift, and he's got this great big gun, he said, "You're Barbara O'Neill, aren't you?" I said, "I am." He said, "I watched your lectures recently, and I learnt that reflux is a scam and the medication they give you is a scam. And I've been on Nexium for 10 years. He said, "I stopped. I started doing what you said. I started eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper." He said, "I took some magnesium to close that valve, and I have never been on Nexium since." Do you know, he's right. And if you've been on Nexium 10 years, my question is it working? Because we live in a body that can heal. And if it's working, you shouldn't need to be on it any longer. Is that right? You don't have to have great letters behind your name. In fact, sometimes you're better off not, because you can investigate this for yourself. You see, this is a muscle, this cardiac sphincter, and it sits right in the middle of our diaphragm. Our diaphragm is a muscle like this. And if our core muscles are weak, that cardiac sphincter will be weak. It's a muscle. So it's time to do your push-ups. Have you done your push-ups this morning? Sorry? Yeah. No. Oh, yes. Jacqueline has. I have. Strengthen the core. If you go to one of the princes in the doctor's office about reflux, will he tell you to strengthen your core? It's a muscle. Muscles can get weak and muscles can get strong. Strengthen your core. The strength of the body is determined by the strength of the core. And whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. Eating most of the food at the end of the day, it weakens that muscle. Because when we lie down at night, the food tends to push against it and weaken it. Or eating all day long, overusing that muscle, stress. Stress tightens all your muscles, which can tend it to open. Everyone that comes to our retreat with reflux or heartburn goes home without it. To give antacids is like this. Let's say the cows keep getting into my vegetable garden and I get my husband to shoot the cows. All I have to do is shut the gate. So when a person takes antacids, they're shooting the cows. Just shut the gate. Because as you will see, when we get into the stomach is an acid environment. And if someone says to me, "I have a very acid stomach," my response is, "You must be digesting your food very well." Because it should be acid. I was working recently with a nutritionist who's been a nutritionist for many years. I said, "Have you ever met anyone with too much acid in their stomach?" He said, "Never." I said, "Either have I. But I have met many with not enough acid." And if someone says, I've got an over-acid stomach, my next question is, how do you know? Well, it burns. Well, that would indicate that you haven't got a nice thick lining on your stomach, which is made up of water. Maybe you're dehydrated. Well, I know I've got too much acid. It keeps coming up. Well, the problem isn't the acid. The problem is the gate. Fix the gate. And then you don't have to shoot all the cows. It's really just common sense, isn't it? So we're moving now into the stomach. And to understand what happens in the stomach, let me show you the lining of the stomach. It's lined with big folds, and they can stretch out to we should be eating maybe about a 1.5 kilo of food, stretches right out then. And then when we wake up in the morning, it's all shrunk up. But it's lined with gastric glands, and these gastric glands, 2/3 of them, release mucus. And that mucus is designed to soothe the lining of the gut, because down in here, something else is released, and that is hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid, 1 drop would burn a hole in your hand, on your skin. So God designed the gut with this thick mucosa wall, and that thick mucosa wall protects the lining of the gut. As well as that, inside the lining of the gut is sodium bicarbonate. And the sodium bicarbonate is designed to neutralize any stomach acid that might come through, and that again protects the lining of the stomach. What also is released here is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite and release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. The only food that is broken down in the stomach is protein, and it's broken down under the action of pepsin. But pepsin and hydrochloric acid only unite in a very acid environment, and pepsin only is active in a very acid environment. So why would someone have low acid? Because they're drinking with their meals. Isn't that such an American habit? Every restaurant you go into, what's the first thing you're asked? What would you like to drink? No, thank you. Oh, we'll bring you water. Well, we let them bring us water because otherwise they don't leave us alone. Because they've never heard of anyone not drinking with their meals. Digestion is a chemical process. Here it is here. These 2 chemicals unite to produce pepsin. Pepsin is the chemical that breaks down protein. And what does water do to chemicals? Dilutes it. Dilutes it. So we should be drinking between meals, not with meals. We should stop drinking about half an hour before the meal and resume about 1.5 hours after the meal. I know at our retreat, a lot of guests struggle with this because they're so used to drinking with their meals. And they keep saying, oh, I keep reaching for the glass. If you want to drink with the meal or after the meal, it is an indication that you sat to the meal dehydrated. The most dehydrated time of the whole day is when you wake up in the morning. That's why we should all have a glass of water next to our beds. If I wake up in the night, I have water. As soon as I wake up in the morning, I have water. And what that water does, it will cause a thick mucosa lining over the gut that will protect the gut, because mucus is 99% water. Did you know that dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid that we do? And have you seen what dogs eat? Kill us. My daughter Emma, she's living in Wisconsin. She's there in the country, and we walked out one day and the smell, and we realized the dog had pulled a leg from a dead cow into the middle of the yard. Whoa, did it smell? And it's eating it. Do you know why they get away with it? Because they've got 10 times the hydrochloric acid that we do. And hydrochloric acid doesn't just unite with pepsinogen to release pepsin, it's antibacterial, it's antifungal, it's antimicrobial. And God designed it that way. It's like the day I was at a friend's house and her teenager is playing with the dog and then got up and made the salad. And I think, dogs carry parasites. Dogs should not be in the kitchen or in the bedroom. You got to wash your hands. Well, I'm so glad that I've encouraged my hydrochloric acid because I don't know what was in their salad. Remember that your gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. And anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me till it gets out of the tube and into the gut. That's why a lady came to me and she said, Barbara, I'm very embarrassed to tell you this, but I'm so sorry, but I'm so worried about it. I said, what is it? She said, my 10-month-old baby ate some dog poo. I said, it's all right, it'll go in, one in and out the other. The gut is considered an external environment. In other words, it's not part of us till the food gets broken down, it gets out of the gut and into the blood. But I don't suggest you eat that. Have you looked at what babies eat? My daughter went in and it's usually 10 months, isn't it? 11, 12 months where they try, everything goes in the mouth. And her little baby had woken up in the cot and was at the windowsill picking up little ladybugs and eating them. You know, it's better than candy. Unfortunately, that gets out of the gut quite quickly and into the blood, and their blood sugar levels go all over the place. But it's important to understand that. And that's why this first lecture, part of it was chronic fatigue syndrome. If you're not getting the nutrients out of your gut and into your blood, then it's not getting to the cell to give you the energy that you need. And that's why digestion is of the utmost importance to understand so that you know what to give your body so you can get the most out of your food. It's a pity to spend a lot of money on top quality organic food and not even able to access it. To understand that, I'm going to tell you a story. And this is a true story. I'd read about it. I'd read, and in fact, in many anatomy and physiology books, it's referred to. And it happened in about the late 1700s because the doctor, Dr. William Beaumont, his book was written in 1833, I think. But he was 25 at the time, and a young man named Alexis St. Martin had sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach. And this had blown out part of his ribs, his stomach. He was only 18 at the time. Dr. Beaumont attended him and said he would not live, but took him to hospital and cleaned him up and patched him up the best he could. This young man recovered. He recovered, but ever after, he had a hole in his stomach. It was about there. In fact, I was able to buy his book. In fact, Amazon found it in a college library in Tennessee or something. Charged me 20 cents because the book had been written in 1833. Cost me $20 by the time I got it, but I didn't complain. And I'm used to reading the King James Version of the Bible, so I could read it because it's very old English. But a fascinating story. He saw his opportunity, Dr. Beaumont, to start doing experiments by putting bits of food into the hole. He'd put bits of food on a silk thread, put it in, leave it an hour, bring it out, have a look at it, put it back in for another hour, had a look at it. And he found that digestion, and there's been much research done since then, of course, to show that digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. Obviously, if a person has a meal of watermelon, that's going to be a lot quicker. But if the meal contains the three essentials, and as we go through this work, we'll be defining the three essentials: fiber. Fiber slowly releases the glucose. Protein. Protein keeps the food in the stomach longer because, as I just showed you, it is protein that is broken down in the stomach under the action of the enzyme pepsin. The third food that keeps the food in the stomach longer is fat. By the end of the week, you're going to love fat instead of hating it. Yes, there are fats that are dangerous. Those cheap seed oils, they're very dangerous. But the saturated fat is not. These are the three foods that keep the food in the stomach longer, allowing us to go a distance between meals. Because what the stomach loves is a rest of 1 hour. So what have we got there? We're looking at 5 to 6 hours between meals. Even children, yes, even children. Have you noticed that children say they're starving when they're bored? And often it's because they're thirsty, not hungry. And you can try it with yourself. It's like my son Peter. My kids, if they were hungry, I'd say, have a drink of water, have a drink of water. One day he came to me, he's 15, he said, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. And I looked at my clock and I said, great, mate, it's lunchtime. And that's what you'll find. When the water's not doing it anymore, it'll actually be time to eat. What Dr. Beaumont found, because actually Alexis St. Martin, he invited him to stay at his house. He got him to do odd jobs so he could keep doing these experiments. In fact, the first third of the book is the story, and the last 2/3, he meticulously documented his experiments. In fact, one day he'd sort of get the gastric juice out and put it into vials, got a bit of rotten meat, put it in one vial. In 20 minutes, it had dealt with that rotten meat. You know what this means? The people that get food poisoning are usually people with low hydrochloric acid, because that hydrochloric acid has a purpose. But he found that there were 5 different things that caused the food to still be in the stomach 8 hours later. One was if he overate. There's only so much hydrochloric acid and enzymes released. When we overload the stomach, the food can be in the stomach hours later. How many people are interested in eating an evening meal on the 25th of December? Not many, because it's usually very large and very big. And by the end of the day, the poor old stomach's slogging away at this food. If he overate, and the other one, which is a surprise today, if he ate often. Let me introduce you to time-restricted eating. Time-restricted eating, it came out of the 5-2 diet, came out of the intermittent fasting. It's eating twice in 24 hours, 6 hours apart. It's been hailed today as the best way to eat. Even the diabetics are being told to eat like that. Have you noticed they never say, sorry, we got it wrong, because they used to say eat every 2 hours. Is that right? Graze. But they never say, sorry, we got it wrong. They say, new research reveals. Well, this has been around since early 1800s. Thus the saying, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, supper like a pauper. One lady said, what a pauper is eat. I said, sometimes nothing. A friend of mine said to me, Barbara, how come your kids are eating all the salad? My kids won't eat salad. My kids are there eating salad. I said, it might have something to do with the chocolate you gave them an hour ago. And she said, oh, Barbara, stop being so fussy. It's not rocket science, is it? The third one is if he ate large fluid with the meal. Because the large fluid with the meal waters down all the gastric juices. And what Dr. Beaumont found is that when he ate large fluid with the meal, digestion stopped. The fluid had to be taken out to bring the stomach back to a high or a low pH, I should say, so that it could continue, so breaking the food down. And what he also found is the pyloric sphincter. This is the little valve at the end of the stomach. And when you wake up in the morning, by the way, it's open. But when you smell, see, think breakfast is coming, that's when the enzymes start to be released. And the first mouthful of food, this pyloric sphincter shuts. And Dr. Beaumont discovered it has sensors. So when the stomach is digesting the food, when it's down to a certain state, it'll open and little bits will start going through. But after a couple of hours, maybe a biscuit comes in, maybe a croissant, maybe a muffin, maybe the person's really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts, whatever it is. Pyloric sphincter says, shut the gate, something's just come in, it's not broken down. And it must stay shut until the newcomer gets broken down, and then it'll start opening. And a little bit more goes through, a bit more goes through, and then a couple of hours later, lunch comes in. Shut the gate, something's just come in, it's not... Can you see what's happening? And that explains why 8 hours later, there was still remnants of breakfast in the stomach if Alexis St. Martin ate often. The next one is if he had alcohol with the meal. Alcohol with the meal slowed down digestion. And if he was stressed or anxious, and the only time he was really stressed or anxious was if he'd had alcohol the night before and he'd had a late night. Years he did these experiments, and his findings changed the nutrition world. I think it's time to reproduce his book. Although no one would understand it, you'd have to have an interpreter because it's very old English. But what he also found was that Alexis St. Martin managed quite well with this hole in the stomach. And Dr. Beaumont said he could have stitched it up, but Alexis St. Martin said, enough, enough. I don't want you to do anything else to me. Alexis St. Martin married, had children, he worked. It was like a mouth. It's sort of, it was only, and folds would come out of it, but when he ate, it'd shrink up a bit with the stomach. It sort of throws things around in the stomach. You know that gurgling you hear? It's the stomach working. It was working hard. Alexis St. Martin lived till he was 85. In fact, Dr. Beaumont said he probably would have lived longer if he hadn't hit the bottle, the alcohol. Every now and then, Dr. Beaumont would say, I was nearly going to say email, telegrammed him and said, please come and stay. I'll feed you well. I'll put you in a nice house. I'll put your children through school. I just want to do a little bit more experiments on you. The time-restricted eating, it shows that our stomach needs a rest. When we lay down to sleep at night, it needs to sleep as well. When I was in Andalusia, the northern part of southern Spain, last year, I stayed in a big stone house, beautiful stone house with walls about 1 metre thick. And the family had 5 children. They had a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9. And those children ate 2 meals a day. They had breakfast about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then they had another meal about 3 in the afternoon. They were homeschooled, the older ones, so they could do it. And the father also worked from home, so it was easy. And the little 2-year-old, you would think he would struggle, but at 11 o'clock, he'd go down for his daytime nap, and he would wake up just before the meal. And they weren't fat, they weren't skinny, they were just a nice size. They were the happiest little kids, and they had 2 meals a day. And you just about be accused of child abuse. Isn't that right? But have you seen how many overweight children we have today? It's a little bit scary. An overweight child, what are they going to be in adolescence? No adolescent wants to be overweight. And it can get back to simply the way that they're being fed. Now we're coming to the duodenum, and the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine, and it's an alkaline environment. And to help maintain this alkalinity, because as you can imagine, what's coming out of the stomach is mixed with the acid enzymes. So here we are into the small intestine. Notice the pancreas releases into the small intestine, and the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate. And that sodium bicarbonate brings that area back to alkalinity. Because the enzymes that work in this part of the small intestine, the first part, they need an alkaline environment. Notice we've got the liver here, and underneath the liver is the gallbladder. The liver makes bile. And if you have been unfortunate enough to lose your gallbladder, I'm so sorry to hear that. If you've been unfortunate enough to lose it, and if they're about to take it out, remember what you say. Thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to seriously consider it. In my Self-Heal by Design and in Sustain Me, there's a chapter on the liver which shows a liver gallbladder cleanse where you can effectively get the stones out. But if your gallbladder has been taken, the good news is it's your liver that makes the bile. The gallbladder is just a reservoir. It's just like a holding station for the bile. So the liver, it releases into the duodenum bile. And bile is the enzyme that breaks down the unsaturated fat. Remember, it was up in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase that the saturated fat was broken down, but the unsaturated fat, its breakdown begins in the small intestine, the duodenum, under the action of bile. The pancreas, it releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase further breaks down the unsaturated fat. And you can see by what I've shown you that it's so much simpler for the body to break down saturated fat. The unsaturated fat is much more complicated. And what have we been told by the princes for the last 40 years? That the polyunsaturated fat is the best fat, but it's actually not so. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember, in the mouth, a salivary amylase was released, which is ptyalin, and that began starch digestion. And then starch is busy getting digested, comes into the acid stomach, and it does continue for maybe 10-15 minutes before acid infiltrates, and then it's stopped. So that's put on hold until it comes to the duodenum, and then pancreatic amylase is released. And because of the sodium bicarbonate, we're back in an alkaline environment, and it finalizes starch digestion. But if the person's chew, swallow, chew, swallow, chew, swallow with their pasta, with their bread, with their cereal, and not a lot of starch digestion happens, can you see it puts a big load on the pancreas? It's almost as if the pancreas says, you're supposed to be half broken down. What are you doing? Oh, they're just going chew, swallow, chew, swallow. They've got to get out the door quickly. They've got to get to it. You're actually, if that's your morning routine, please go for a smoothie. And when you're driving along, sip away on it. Because chew, swallow with cereal, with bread, it can really interfere with proper digestion. The pancreas also releases what I call the trypsin brothers. Who are the trypsin brothers? Well, I call them the trypsin brothers to make it a little bit easier because it's trypsin and chymotrypsin, That should have a P in it. So I'll just call it the trypsin brothers. And what the trypsin brothers do, they finalise protein digestion. Remember where protein digestion began? It began in the stomach under the action of pepsin, and it's finalised in the duodenum under the action of the trypsin brothers. Now, I've got some good news. It's not going to get any harder. This is about the, it's going to start to get easier. But they're the enzymes responsible for the proper breakdown of our food. So what happens with protein? Protein, for purposes of illustration, I'll draw it like this. So this is protein, and when it gets into the stomach, it's broken down to peptides and polypeptides. And then when it gets down into the duodenum, the trypsin brothers break it down to amino acids, the peptide, and the polypeptide gets broken down to a peptide and an amino acid, and then the peptide gets broken down to amino acid. And only these singular structures can get out of the gut and into the blood. But let me tell you something that's happening today. There's many people that are eating all day long, they're drinking with their meals, they're stressed out. And so protein, not digested, is getting down into the duodenum. And the pancreas says, "What are you doing here?" And the protein says they're eating all day long, they're drinking with their meals, they're eating the largest meal at the end of the day, it's just exhausting the digestive enzymes. And so the trypsin brothers say, well, we'll do the best we can. And all the trypsin brothers could do is break it down to peptides and polypeptides. After the break, I'm going to show you the grand finale of digestion. Our food should be all absorbed halfway down our small intestine, but the peptide and the polypeptide cannot be absorbed. And so it just keeps going. It comes into the colon says, "What are you doing here?" And the peptide and the polypeptide said, well, they're drinking with their meals, they're eating all day long, they're stressed out, and pepsin didn't do anything, and the trypsin brothers did the best they could. And the colon says, well, all right. So it has to create a lot of excess bacteria to try and deal with that, and that causes methane gas. You've heard of methane gas? Comes out the other end. It can all be because of, remember, way back in the mouth. Eating too much, not chewing properly, drinking with... Oh, that's why, as I started, those 5 choices we make affect the whole of the gastrointestinal tract. I'm going to give you a break now. Many people need a break to be able to digest this information. And we're going to come back about 10 past 11. So you've got time for a quick visit to the little house, that's what we call it in Australia, or a drink of water, and we will continue our journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.